The giant alien spaceship moved quietly through the dark space between stars. Its name was Kethmaran, and it was bigger than most cities on Earth. The ship was made of black metal that seemed to eat light instead of reflecting it. Like a hungry monster floating in the void, waiting to swallow anything that came too close. Deep inside the ship, in a room where soldiers ate their meals, 4 aliens sat around a metal table. The room smelled like machine oil and recycled air that had been breathed. Too many times the walls were covered with screens showing the emptiness of space outside. But the 4 creatures were not looking at the screens. They were too busy laughing. Vextar was the first alien, and he looked like a giant bug that had learned to walk on 2 legs. His skin was hard and shiny like armor. His head was shaped like a triangle with 2 big black eyes that never blinked. When he laughed, his mouth opened to show rows of sharp teeth that could cut through metal. His 6 arms moved constantly as he talked, waving in the air like he was conducting music. Next to him sat an Algorim who was as big as 3 humans put together. His skin looked like gray stone with cracks running through it like old concrete. His hands were so large, they could crush a human head like an egg. When he moved, the floor shook under his weight. His laugh sounded like rocks falling down a mountain. The 3rd alien was Zilquin, and she was covered in blue scales that changed color when light hit them. Her tail was as long as her body and ended in sharp spikes that could punch holes in steel armor. Her yellow eyes glowed in the dim light of the room like 2 small suns. She had 4 arms, just like Vextar, but hers ended in claws instead of hands. The last alien was Mordek, and he was the strangest of all. He had 12 eyes scattered across his face like marbles thrown on the ground. Each eye could look in a different direction at the same time. His body was thin and gray with 4 arms that bent in ways that would break human bones. His mouth was just a slit that barely opened when he spoke. These 4 aliens were soldiers on the great warship, and they had been fighting battles across the galaxy for many years. They had seen planets burn and entire species disappear. They thought they knew everything about war and weakness and strength. But today, they were talking about something that made them laugh harder than they had laughed in months: human stories. Vextar picked up a piece of metal that served as his food and bit into it with his sharp teeth. The sound was like nails on a blackboard, but none of the other aliens seemed to mind. They were used to sounds that would drive humans crazy. "Did you hear what those soft pink creatures told us about their legends?" Vextar said between bites. "They actually believe their ancestors fought giant flying lizards with nothing but sharp sticks and rocks. Can you imagine anything so stupid? They claim some human named Binwu once lifted an entire mountain to save his village from being crushed." Nalgarim's laugh shook the entire table, making their metal food bounce up and down. "Even better," he said, his voice like thunder in a cave. "They have stories about humans who could not be killed. They say a woman named Sora was thrown into a volcano by her enemies and came out stronger than before. These weak creatures actually think fire makes them more powerful, instead of turning them into ash like any normal being." Zilquin's scales rippled with colors as she joined the laughter. "My favorite story is about the human who fought an army of 1,000 warriors all by himself and won. They say he moved so fast that nobody could see him, and hit so hard that he could break mountains with his bare hands. These humans must be the most imaginative liars in the galaxy." Mordek's 12 eyes all focused on his 3 companions at once, which was something that always made other species feel uncomfortable. "The most ridiculous tale is about humans who could heal from any wound," he said in his thin voice that sounded like air leaking from a broken pipe. "They claim their warriors could lose arms and legs in battle and grow them back like some kind of plant. It is no wonder. They are the weakest species we have ever encountered." The 4 aliens continued laughing and sharing more human stories. Each tale sounded more impossible than the last. Stories of humans who could fly without wings, who could see through solid walls, who could speak to animals and make them obey. Stories of warriors who fought for days without rest, who lifted boulders 10 times their own weight, who survived in the frozen vacuum of space without protection. What made the stories even funnier to the aliens was how weak humans actually were. Everyone in the galaxy knew that humans were fragile creatures. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore from the smallest cuts. They needed to breathe constantly, or they would die. They had to drink water every few days or their bodies would shut down. They could not survive in hot places or cold places without special equipment. How could such weak creatures create such strong heroes in their stories? It was like watching a tiny insect pretend to be a mighty warrior. The gap between reality and their legends was so huge that it seemed impossible they came from the same species. But while the four soldiers laughed and mocked human stories, none of them noticed the dark figure standing in the shadows near the door. Commander Krethak had been listening to their conversation for several minutes. His face showed no emotion, but his 3-century-old eyes held secrets that would have terrified his young soldiers if they knew. Krethak was not like the other aliens on the ship. He was ancient by the standards of his species. He had lived for 300 years and had seen things that most beings could not imagine. While his soldiers were busy laughing at human legends, he was remembering the truth behind those stories. The commander remembered the first time his people had tried to invade Earth 50 years ago. Back then, everyone in the galactic community thought humans were primitive and weak. They lived on a small blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. They had barely learned to travel between the stars in simple metal ships. Their weapons were crude, their armies were small, and their technology was centuries behind the rest of the galaxy. It should have been the easiest conquest in galactic history. 10,000 alien warships against one small planet full of weak creatures who had never faced real war. The invasion fleet was so confident of victory that many ships brought celebration supplies instead of extra ammunition. They expected to be dividing up Earth's resources within a few days, but something went wrong. Something that still gave Krethak nightmares, even after 50 years. He remembered landing on Earth with the first wave of soldiers. The sky was burning with the light of alien weapons, and human cities were already starting to fall. Everything was going according to plan until the humans did something that no species in galactic history had ever done before. Instead of surrendering, when they were clearly beaten, instead of running, when their weapons proved useless, instead of begging for mercy, when their cities burned, the humans fought harder. They fought with a fury that made no sense. They fought when they had no chance of winning. They fought with broken weapons and bare hands. They fought until their bodies should have collapsed from exhaustion, and then they fought some more. Krethak had seen a human soldier named Do-hyun tear through a steel door with his bare hands after watching alien soldiers capture his family. The metal should have been impossible for human muscles to bend, but somehow the man's fingers had cut through it like soft clay. He had watched a woman called Yujin walk out of an explosion that should have vaporized her. The blast had been powerful enough to melt rock, but she had emerged from the flames with burns that healed while he watched. Most terrifying of all he had seen, a human commander named Taiho continue fighting after, being shot, stabbed, and beaten until he should have been dead 3 times over. Each wound that should have killed him only seemed to make him stronger and angrier. The legends humans told were not stories at all. They were memories. Instructions passed down through generations, teaching each new group of humans how to become the heroes their ancestors had been when they needed to be. Standing in the shadows, listening to his soldiers mock the very stories that had once turned the greatest military force in the galaxy into running cowards, Krethak felt the old fear creeping back into his hearts. He knew something. His laughing soldiers did not. Tomorrow they would have human prisoners aboard the ship. And if those humans were pushed too far, if they were hurt or threatened or made desperate enough, the legends would stop being stories and start being reality once again. The commander turned and walked away from the laughing soldiers, leaving them to their mockery and their ignorance. They would learn the truth soon enough. The morning alarm on the alien warship Kethmaran screamed through the metal corridors like an angry beast. The sound bounced off the walls and made the entire ship vibrate with noise. All the alien soldiers knew what this alarm meant. New prisoners were coming aboard in the main hangar bay. Dozens of aliens gathered to watch the transport ship land. The bay was huge enough to hold 3 human cities, but it felt crowded with all the curious soldiers pushing forward to get a better look. Steam hissed from pipes in the ceiling, and the air smelled like burning metal and alien sweat. The transport ship was small and black, with scorch marks along its sides showing it had been through a battle. The engines made a whining sound as they powered. Down and landing gear extended with mechanical clicks that echoed through the hangar. The ship settled onto the metal floor with a thud that everyone felt through their feet. Vextar pushed through the crowd of aliens, his 6 arms moving other soldiers. Out of his way, his black eyes were bright with excitement and his sharp teeth clicked together in anticipation. Finally, he said to his 3 friends who followed behind him, "We get to see some real humans up close. I want to see how weak these legendary heroes really are." Nalgorim cracked his knuckles and the sound was like breaking rocks. "Maybe we can test their strength." He rumbled in his deep voice that made the floor shake. "I want to see if they break as easily as their reputation suggests. These creatures who claim their ancestors could move mountains should be fun to play with." Zilquin's blue scales shimmered with excitement as her tail swished back and forth behind her. "I heard that humans cry when they are scared," she said with a cruel smile. "I want to see the tears of a species that tells stories about warriors who cannot be killed. It will be amusing to watch their legends." Crumble Mordek's 12 eyes all turned to focus on the transport ship at the same time, which made several nearby aliens step away from him uncomfortably. "The humans inside probably believe their own stories," he said in his whisper-thin voice. "They probably think they are brave until they see real warriors. Then they will understand how small and weak they truly are." The door of the transport ship opened with a loud clang and steam poured out like the breath of a sleeping dragon. 3 alien guards emerged, first their weapons ready, and their eyes scanning the crowd of watchers. Then came the prisoners, and the entire hangar fell silent. 3 humans walked out of the ship, and they were not what anyone expected. The first human was young, barely more than a boy, but he walked with his back straight and his head up. His name was Jinho, and he had dark hair that fell across his forehead. His clothes were torn and dirty from battle, but he moved like a cat ready to spring. His eyes were the most surprising thing about him because they were not afraid. They were calm and watchful, taking in everything around him like he was memorizing every detail. The second prisoner was an older woman with gray hair streaked with white. Her name was Minseo, and she looked like someone's grandmother, the kind of person who would bake cookies and tell stories to children. But there was something in the way she stood that made even the biggest alien soldiers feel uncomfortable. Her back was straight as a sword, and her eyes burned with an inner fire that seemed to light up her whole face. The third human was a middle-aged man named Wu Jin, who looked completely ordinary except for one thing. He was too calm, too relaxed, too peaceful for someone who had just been captured by enemies. While the other 2 humans looked around at their captors, this man kept his eyes closed and breathed slowly and deeply, like he was meditating or sleeping. The alien soldiers stared at these 3 humans, trying to understand what they were seeing. These were supposed to be examples of the weakest species in the galaxy. But something about them felt wrong. Something that made the watching aliens shift nervously and whisper among themselves. Vextar was the first to overcome his confusion. He strutted forward on his 6 legs and poked Jinho in the chest with one clawed finger. "Look at this pathetic creature," he announced loudly so everyone could hear. "I bet this child has never killed anything bigger than an insect." His finger pressed harder against the human's chest, expecting him to stumble or cry out. But Jinho did not move. He stood perfectly still and looked up at the giant bug-like alien with eyes that seemed much older than his young face. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable, and Vextar found himself pulling his finger back without knowing why Nalgarim decided to try next. He reached out with one massive stone-like hand and grabbed Minseo's arm roughly. His fingers could have crushed human bones like twigs, and he expected the old woman to scream in pain. Instead, Minseo just looked at his hand, then up at his face with an expression that made him feel like he was the one being examined. Strange, the giant alien muttered, letting go of her arm. "She should be begging for mercy by now. All the other species we have captured start crying and pleading within minutes, but this female just stares at me like she is not impressed." Zilquin slithered forward on her scaled belly, her tail moving behind her like a snake. She circled around Wu Jin several times, her yellow eyes studying him from every angle. "This one is too calm," she hissed. Her voice carried the sound of wind through dead leaves. "Humans are supposed to panic when they are captured. They should be afraid of us. Why is he acting like he is?" Taking a pleasant walk in a garden, Mordek's multiple eyes focused on all 3 prisoners at the same time, which usually terrified other species into submission. but the humans barely seemed to notice his unsettling gaze. "Maybe they are defective," he suggested. "Even for humans, they seem unusually quiet. Perhaps their minds have broken from fear and they cannot respond normally anymore." From high above on the command deck of the ship, Commander Krethak watched the scene through security cameras. His 3-century-old hands gripped the metal railing in front of him hard enough to leave dent marks. His ancient eyes saw things that his young soldiers could not understand. These were not ordinary prisoners. These were not broken, defeated enemies, brought aboard for questioning. The way they moved, the way they breathed, the way they observed everything around them, spoke of training and preparation that went far beyond normal military conditioning. They moved like dancers who knew every step of a deadly performance. More importantly, he could see something in their eyes that he had learned to recognize and fear during the first invasion of Earth 50 years ago. It was a look that humans got when they were pushed beyond their normal limits, when their survival instincts began to wake up from their long sleep, when the impossible stories they told about their ancestors started to become reality. The young one, Jinho, had the coiled tension of a spring wound too tight. The woman, Minseo, radiated a dangerous calm that reminded him of the center of a hurricane where everything was still and quiet, but surrounded by devastating power. But it was Wu Jin who worried him most. The man's stillness was not the stillness of fear or resignation. It was the patience of a hunter waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. Krethak's communication device buzzed with an incoming message. "Commander, the prisoners are being moved to interrogation chambers 7, 8, and 9. Should we begin standard questioning procedures?" The ancient alien commander stared at the screen showing the 3 humans being escorted through the corridors of his ship. Every instinct developed over 3 centuries of warfare screamed at him that this was a terrible mistake. These were not prisoners at all. They were weapons waiting to be activated. "Proceed with extreme caution," he ordered, his voice carrying all the weight of his years and experience. "Keep all security teams on maximum. Alert and monitor the prisoners constantly. Something about these humans feels very different from anything we have encountered before." As the prisoners disappeared from view, escorted deeper into the ship by guards who had no idea what they were really dealing with, Krethak found himself remembering another human legend that his soldiers had mocked the day before. The story of a man who had been captured by enemies and locked in chains only to escape by killing them all with nothing but his bare hands and unbreakable will. At the time he had thought it might be just another exaggerated tale told by a weak species trying to make themselves feel stronger. Now watching his crew escort 3 deceptively calm humans into the heart of his mighty warship, he wondered if they were about to discover just how accurate human legends really were, and whether any of them would survive the lesson. The interrogation chambers deep inside the alien warship, Kethmaran, were designed to break the spirit of any living creature. The rooms were small and dark with walls made of the hardest metal in the galaxy. Bright lights shined down from the ceiling, making it impossible to hide from their glare. The air was thin and hard to breathe, and the temperature changed from burning hot to freezing cold without warning. These chambers had worked on every species the aliens had ever captured. Proud warriors had begged for mercy after only hours. Strong leaders had revealed their deepest secrets rather than face another minute of the psychological torture. But as the hours passed, it became clear that the 3 human prisoners were very different from anything the aliens had encountered before. In Interrogation Chamber 7, Jinho sat in a metal chair with restraints made from the strongest materials known to galactic science. The restraints were designed to hold creatures 10 times stronger than humans and had never failed before. But something strange was happening to the young human that made his interrogator Vextar increasingly uncomfortable. "Tell us the location of your fleet's command base," Vextar demanded for the 100th time. His mandibles clicked together with frustration and his 6 arms waved in the air like angry snakes. "We know you have a secret base hidden somewhere in this sector, and we will find it eventually. You can make this easy on yourself by telling us." Now Jinho looked up at the giant bug-like alien, and for the first time since his capture, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, and it made Vextar take a step backward without knowing why. "You know what is funny?" the young human said in a voice that seemed deeper than before. My grandfather used to tell me stories about our family. Stories about how my great-great-grandfather once fought off an entire pack of wolves with nothing but a farming tool. The alien interrogator clicked his sharp teeth together impatiently. I do not care about your primitive family stories. Answer my question or face the consequences. Jinho continued talking as if Vextar had not spoken. I always thought grandfather was exaggerating when he told those stories. I mean, how could one man fight so many dangerous animals and win? It seemed impossible for someone as small and weak as a human. As he spoke, something began to happen to the metal restraints around Jinho's wrists. They were made from an alloy that could withstand the pressure of a collapsing star, but hairline cracks started to appear where the human skin touched the metal. The cracks spread slowly at first, then faster as if the metal itself was becoming afraid. But sitting here, listening to you threaten people I care about. Jinho continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I am starting to think maybe grandfather was not lying after all. Maybe those stories were not just entertainment, maybe they were instructions. Vextar stared in horror as the restraints around the human's wrists began to buckle and bend. The metal was actually changing shape under pressure that should have been impossible for human muscles to generate. What are you doing? He whispered, his confidence cracking like the metal bonds. Jinho's eyes began to glow with a soft inner light that made the harsh interrogation chamber lights seem dim by comparison. I am remembering, he said simply. And when humans remember what we are really capable of, things start to change in interrogation chamber 8. The scene was even more disturbing. Minzeo faced her own interrogator, Nalgorim, who had been trying to break her through physical intimidation for hours. The massive stone-like alien had used his giant fists to dent the metal table next to her head and crush pieces of equipment to show his strength. But the gray-haired woman seemed completely unaffected by his displays of power. My daughter used to ask me about the old stories, Minseo said conversationally, as if she were having tea with a friend instead of being tortured by a creature that could crush her with one hand. She wanted to know if the tale about her great-grandmother was true, the one where she walked through a burning building to save children and came out without a single burn. Nalgorim raised his massive fist again, preparing to smash it down next to her head, like he had done dozens of times before. But something in the woman's tone made him hesitate. There was a quality to her voice that had not been there before, something that made the air in the chamber feel thick and heavy. I told my daughter they were just stories. Minzeo continued, her voice growing warmer with each word. But you know what? I am starting to remember some things differently now. Starting to remember that burning feeling in my chest when someone threatens my family. Starting to remember what it feels like when a human grandmother gets truly angry. The temperature in the interrogation chamber began to rise, though neither of them understood why. At first the metal walls started to radiate heat, like they were sitting inside an oven. Nalgorim, who could survive in molten lava, found himself stepping backward as sweat began to form on his stone, like skin. The woman's gray hair began to shimmer and flow like liquid silver, and her eyes took on the bright orange glow of flames. Her skin radiated warmth that turned the metal floor beneath her feet cherry red. The chains that held her to the chair started to glow with heat. What is happening to you? Nalgorim demanded, but his voice cracked with fear as he spoke. Minzeo smiled, and when she did, the temperature spiked so high that the monitoring equipment in the chamber began to melt. I am becoming what my family always knew I could be, she said, a human protecting her children. In interrogation chamber. 9. The most unsettling transformation of all was taking place. Wujin had not moved from his seated position, but everything around him was changing in ways that defied physics and logic. The metal walls were developing stress fractures that spread in perfect geometric patterns like spider webs made of light. The story about becoming one with the mountain, Wujin explained to his terrified interrogator Zilquin, who was pressed against the far wall in terror, was not about meditation or philosophy. It was about understanding that humans do not just adapt to their environment. When we need to, we make the environment adapt. To us, Zilquin watched in horror as the supposedly solid metal of the interrogation chamber began to flow like water around the human. The walls rippled and moved according to his will, and the floor beneath him became as soft as clay, reshaping itself to match his thoughts. "What are you?" she whispered, her scaled skin turning pale with fear. Wu Jin finally stood up, and as he did, the entire ship shuddered, as if the metal itself was responding to his presence. The walls around him bent and twisted into new shapes that should have been impossible for solid matter to achieve. "I am exactly what your commander feared we were," he said calmly. "I am a human who has remembered what we are really capable of on the command deck." Alarms blared from every system as Commander Krethak watched his worst nightmares unfold on the security monitors. The ship's structural integrity readings were failing in ways that made no scientific sense. Energy readings were completely off the charts, and somewhere in the depths of his vessel, 3 humans were demonstrating abilities that violated every law of physics his species understood. "So should we abandon ship?" his second in command asked, his voice barely containing panic. "The humans are somehow affecting the ship's hull integrity from the inside." Krethak stared at the monitors showing 3 humans who had somehow transcended the normal limitations of their species. The young one had broken restraints that could hold a giant. The old woman had turned herself into a living furnace. And the calm man was reshaping solid metal with nothing but his will. He remembered now why the first invasion of Earth had failed so catastrophically 50 years ago. It was not because humans were good fighters or had superior weapons. It was because when pushed to their absolute limits, humans became something that no military force in the galaxy was prepared to handle. They became the heroes from their own legends, and those heroes were not bound by the same rules that governed normal life, no. He said quietly, his 3 centuries of experience finally giving him the clarity he needed. "We surrender immediately. Before they decide we are too much of a threat to leave alive." The ancient commander reached for his communication system, preparing to broadcast a message he never thought he would send. A complete and unconditional surrender to 3 members of the galaxy's supposedly weakest species, because he had finally learned the most dangerous truth in the universe. Sometimes the most terrifying legends are the ones that turn out to be instruction manuals. The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong aboard the alien warship came from Interrogation Chamber 7, where Jinho had been held. The security cameras showed images that made no sense according to everything the aliens knew about physics and biology. The young human stood in the middle of the room with his metal restraints lying in twisted pieces around his feet like broken jewelry. But it was not just that he had broken free from bonds designed to hold creatures much stronger than humans. It was how he looked while doing it. Jinho's entire body seemed to glow with an inner light that the cameras could barely capture. His skin shimmered like it was made of liquid starlight, and when he moved it was with the fluid grace of a hunting cat rather than a supposedly weak human. When Vextar tried to stop him with his energy weapon, Jinho did something that should have been impossible. He reached out with his bare hand and caught the energy blast like it was a ball thrown by a child. The deadly beam that could melt through starship armor simply disappeared into his palm like water soaking into sand. Impossible. Vextar clicked in terror as the human approached him with slow, deliberate steps that seemed to make the metal floor ring like a bell. Energy weapons cannot be stopped by flesh and bone. It violates the fundamental laws of physics. Jinho's voice, when he spoke, carried strange harmonics that made the metal walls of the chamber vibrate, in tune with his words. "My great-great-grandfather did not fight wolves with farming tools," he said, and his eyes blazed with light that hurt to look at directly. He fought them with something much more dangerous. He fought them with the fury of a human protecting his family. The young man reached out and grabbed Vextar's advanced alien weapon, crumpling the sophisticated technology like it was made of soft clay. His fingers left deep impressions in metal that was supposed to be indestructible. "And right now you have threatened my family." Vextar tried to run but found that his 6 legs would not obey him. The human's presence filled the chamber with an energy that seemed to freeze the alien in place like a small animal caught in the gaze of a predator. The bug-like creature could only watch in horror as Jinho casually destroyed equipment that represented centuries of alien technological advancement. In Interrogation Chamber 8, Minzeo had undergone an even more dramatic transformation. Her gray hair now flowed around her head like liquid silver moved by invisible winds. Her entire body radiated heat that was turning the metal floor beneath her feet. cherry red. When Nalgorim tried to grab her with his massive stone-like hands, his supposedly indestructible skin actually began to sizzle and smoke at the contact. The burning building story was true, she said, her voice carrying the crackle and pop of flames. But my daughter never understood the real lesson. It was not that great-grandmother was fireproof. It is that when a human truly needs to protect someone, fire becomes our ally instead of our enemy. The temperature in the chamber spiked so high that the monitoring equipment began to melt into puddles of liquid. Metal Nalgorim, who belonged to a species that could swim in molten lava, found himself backing away from a human grandmother, whose protective instincts had literally turned her into a living furnace. The walls around her began to glow red-hot, and the air itself seemed to catch fire. "You are not supposed to be able to do this." Nalgorim rumbled, his voice shaking with fear for the first time in his long life. "Humans are weak creatures. You break easily. You burn. You die. How can you control?" Firemanzo smiled, and when she did, the flames around her danced higher and brighter. "Because you never understood what we really are," she said. "We are not the weak creatures you thought we were. We are the descendants of beings who survived on a world that tried to kill us in every way possible. And when we need to, we remember how to be what our ancestors were." In Interrogation Chamber 9, the most unsettling sight of all was unfolding. Woojin had not moved from his seated position, but everything around him was changing according to his will. The metal walls were flowing like water, reshaping themselves into impossible geometric patterns that hurt to look at. The floor beneath him had become as soft as clay, molding itself to match his thoughts. The story about becoming one with the mountain, he explained to Zilquen, who was pressed against the far wall, trembling with terror, was not about meditation or philosophy. It was about understanding that humans do not just adapt to their environment. When we truly need to, we make the environment adapt to us. Zilquen watched in horror as the supposedly solid metal of the starship began to obey the human's will, like it was alive and eager to please him. The walls bent and twisted into new shapes that defied everything she knew about matter and energy. The ceiling above them rippled like the surface of a lake disturbed by wind. "What are you?" she whispered, her blue scales turning pale with fear. "How can you control matter itself, with just your thoughts?" Woojin finally stood up, and as he did, the entire massive warship shuddered and groaned as if the metal itself was responding to his presence. The vibrations traveled through every corridor and chamber, making thousands of aliens aboard the ship feel the power that was awakening in the depths of their vessel. "I am what your legends warned you about," he said calmly, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the chamber, despite speaking softly. "I am a human who has been pushed far enough to remember what we really are. And what we really are is much more dangerous than what we pretend to be." On the command deck of the ship, alarms screamed from every system at once. Commander Krethak watched the security feeds, showing 3 humans who had somehow transcended every limitation that science said governed living beings. The ship's computers were registering energy readings that broke their measurement scales. Structural integrity warnings flashed red across every screen, so the ship's hull is showing stress fractures that should not be possible. His second in command reported, his voice cracking with panic. The humans are somehow affecting the molecular structure of the ship itself. "We are detecting energy signatures that do not match any known physics." Krethak stared at the monitors showing 3 ordinary-looking humans who were casually violating the laws of nature. The young one had become a being of living light who could destroy advanced technology with his bare hands. The old woman had turned into a creature of pure fire who could melt metal with her presence, and the calm man was reshaping solid matter through willpower alone. The ancient commander remembered the stories from the first invasion of Earth 50 years ago. Stories that had sounded like impossible exaggerations at the time. Tales of human soldiers who had survived direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized them. Warriors who had fought for days without rest or food. Ordinary people who had performed feats that seemed to violate everything science understood about biology and physics. Now he understood that those stories had not been exaggerations at all. They had been accurate reports of what humans became when their survival mechanisms fully activated, When they were pushed beyond the breaking point that would destroy any other species, humans did not break, they evolved. "Sir, should we abandon ship?" his officer asked. Again, Krethak looked at his crew of trained soldiers who were staring at the screens in terror at the sight of 3 humans, demonstrating abilities that no military doctrine in the galaxy was designed to handle. These were warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds, who had never known defeat, who had always been the strongest force on any battlefield. And they were afraid of 3 members of what they had always believed was the weakest species in the galaxy. "No," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of hard-earned wisdom. "We surrender, and we pray that these humans are merciful enough to let us live long enough to warn the rest of the galaxy about what happens when you push humanity too far." The commander reached for the ship-wide communication system, preparing to broadcast the most humbling message of his long career. A complete and unconditional surrender to 3 human prisoners, who had just proven that every legend their species told was not fantasy, but fact, because sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who look harmless until you give them a reason to stop pretending to be weak. The surrender of the mighty alien warship Kethmoran sent shockwaves through the entire Galactic Fleet. Communications officers across 100 different ships received the impossible message that Commander Krethak was giving up his vessel to 3 human prisoners. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an entire alien warship had capitulated to members of what everyone believed was the weakest species in the universe. In the main hangar bay of the ship, Jinho Minseo and Wujin stood together as their transformed states gradually returned to normal. The glowing light around Jinho faded until he looked like an ordinary young man again, though his eyes now held depths they had not possessed before. Minseo's flames died down and her hair returned to its normal gray color, but with new silver streaks that seemed to catch light in impossible ways. Wujin appeared calm and unremarkable once more, but somehow he seemed more solid, more present than he had been. Before Commander Krethak approached them slowly across the vast metal floor, his ancient features showed a mixture of deep respect and lingering fear. Behind him, his entire crew watched in stunned silence as their supposedly invincible commander prepared to address the humans who had just redefined everything they thought they knew about warfare and power. "I owe you an explanation," Krethak said, his voice carrying the weight of his 3 centuries of life. "And more importantly, I owe your entire species an apology that is long overdue." Jinho tilted his head curiously, the movement somehow more graceful than it had been before his transformation. "An apology for what exactly?" "For not listening when we should have, the alien commander," replied his voice heavy with regret. "For dismissing your legends as primitive stories when they were actually the most important information in the galaxy. For treating your species like weaklings when you are actually the most dangerous beings any of us have ever encountered." Minzio stepped forward and several alien crew members instinctively moved backward, even though she looked like a harmless grandmother again. "But you learned differently," she said, and there was warmth in her voice, like embers glowing in a fireplace. "I learned that human legends are not stories about imaginary heroes." Krethak confirmed, his ancient eyes looking directly at each of the 3 humans in turn. "They are genetic memories passed down through generations of your species, teaching each new group of humans how to access abilities that remain sleeping until you need them most." What we witnessed today was not magic or impossible science. It was human evolution happening in real time. Wujin nodded slowly, and when he moved, the metal floor beneath his feet seemed to respond slightly to his presence. "You have encountered this before during your first invasion attempt. During the first invasion 50 years ago," Krethak admitted, and his voice grew quiet. "With the memory, we attacked your planet Earth with a fleet of 10,000 ships, expecting easy conquest of a primitive world. Instead, we met humans who could survive our most powerful weapons, adapt to our battle strategies, and perform feats that our science said were completely impossible." The alien commander gestured to his crew, who were still staring in fascination and terror at the 3 humans. "My soldiers laugh at your legends because they have never seen a human pushed beyond their normal limits. They do not understand that every story about impossible heroism in your culture is actually a training manual. a guide for accessing abilities that your species developed over millions of years of surviving on the most dangerous planet any of us have ever studied. Earth is not just our home, Jinho realized, understanding dawning in his transformed eyes. It is our testing ground. Exactly. Krethak confirmed. Most worlds that produce intelligent life are relatively safe, stable environments with predictable weather and few natural dangers. Your planet tried to kill your species in every way imaginable. Ice ages that lasted for thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun, predators that hunted you, diseases that wiped out entire populations, natural disasters that would completely destroy civilizations on other worlds. Minzio smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several alien crew members take another step backward. And all those survival challenges are still written into our genetic code, waiting to be activated when we need them most. Your legends of heroes lifting mountains, surviving impossible odds, performing feats of superhuman strength and endurance. Krethak continued. They are not fantasies created by primitive minds. They are historical records. Examples of what humans become when their survival mechanisms fully activate. They are proof that your species does not just adapt to impossible situations. You evolve to overcome them in ways that seem miraculous to other species. Wujin looked around the hangar, noting how the metal itself seemed to bend slightly toward him, as if recognizing his will. So when you invaded Earth 50 years ago, we activated an entire planet full of survival instincts, Krethak finished grimly. Suddenly we were not fighting ordinary humans anymore. We were fighting a species that could adapt to our weapons faster than we could deploy them. Soldiers who could survive direct hits from energy beams that should have vaporized them. Civilians who could somehow turn our own technology against us in ways our engineers said were impossible. The alien commander's expression grew even more somber. Of the 10,000 ships in our invasion fleet, fewer than 100 escaped your solar system alive. Not because of superior human technology or military tactics, but because when you truly threaten humanity's survival, individual humans start becoming the heroes from their own legends. And those heroes are not bound by the same physical laws that limit other species. Jinho Minseo and Wujin exchanged glances, each seeing the truth reflected in the other's changed eyes. They had always carried this potential within them, this ability to transcend normal human limitations when the stakes became high enough. The legends their grandparents had told them were not entertainment. They were instruction manuals for becoming more than human when humanity itself was threatened. So what happens now? Minzio asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Now we return you to your people with our sincere apologies and our absolute assurance that this fleet will never again threaten human space. Krethak said, straightening to attention in a gesture of deep respect. And we spread the word throughout every corner of the galaxy that human legends are not fables to be mocked or dismissed. The ancient commander's voice grew formal, carrying the weight of an official decree that would echo through galactic communication networks for generations to come. They are warnings to be respected and remembered, because the galaxy's greatest mistake would be pushing humanity far enough to discover just how many of their impossible heroes are still waiting to be awakened. As the three humans prepared to return to their own ship, Krethak called out one final message that would become legend itself among alien species. Let it be known throughout all worlds, human legends are not entertainment for children. They are evidence of capabilities that sleep within every member of their species, and the wise will remember that some species become infinitely more dangerous the harder you try to destroy them. The story of the Kethmoran's surrender spread through alien cultures as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating humanity. But among humans it became something else entirely, a reminder that the impossible heroes of their stories were not ancient history buried in the past. They were a promise of what any human could become when the people they loved were threatened, and they remembered what their species was truly capable of achieving.